Great, fantastic. Have you had fun? Have you learned anything during the day? And who is more confused? Raise your hands. Who is less confused? Who is waiting for cocktails? All right, that's very good. So it's Jane, all four of us, between them and the cocktail hour. So we better be good. So let's start with you, Timothy.
Right.
We are navigating unprecedented waters. There is massive technological revolution. There is the center of gravity, i.e. the United States of America, obviously is pressing Control, Alt, Reset, right? Something is going on. Now, you as a practitioner, as a leader, how do you navigate these waters, and what would be your key advice to leaders like the people in the room?
You know, it's funny. I don't look at myself as a leader. I look at myself as a change agent. So I'm kind of enjoying this. I look for change. When there's a change, it's great for entrepreneurs. And particularly this kind of change where they're shining light on bureaucracies that have done that have been, in some cases, corrupt, but definitely have been wasting a lot of taxpayer money. And they're kind of saying, hey, eventually we want free trade, but for now we're gonna shock the system, and we're gonna bring everybody to the table so that we can come to a place where we all like working together. China doesn't seem to understand that, but everybody else in the world, I think, does. So I'm looking at it in a couple of ways. I love innovation. I love the innovations that have happened in Bitcoin. I love the innovations that are happening in AI and robotics. And I love the innovations that are happening in healthcare, that we're going to probably be able to live forever. Well, except for accidents. But even after accidents, we might be able to live forever. And space is really getting interesting. We've got a company called Max Space that shoots sort of a deflated balloon up into the sky, opens up like a space station, and it's the size of a football stadium, and it can block the sun in certain places so it can kind of cool down the Earth or warm it up depending on where it is.
I thought you were going to say that it blows up into a football-sized stadium and Taylor Swift comes and does a performance.
She certainly may. I mean, I'm sure that's coming. And actually, it'd probably be the next Taylor Swift will be like a tumbler in space. Anyway, a lot of cool things should be happening. Here's what's exciting for me. You know, I'm sure there are people who like the woke thing, but the woke thing to me was limiting creativity. And the SEC was this dark cloud over entrepreneurship, and it scared us. And we didn't innovate the way we thought we should. And here, living in California, we're 3,000 miles from Washington. We can innovate. We should be able to innovate. We should be able to do whatever we want and come up with really cool things. And being far enough away from the rule makers, we should be able to try stuff. And that's what I've grown up in. I've grown up in a world where we could try stuff. Well, I was starting to feel constrained.
Right.
I was starting to feel like, oh, that was a good idea, but I don't think I'm going to do it.
Right.
I don't think I'll try that because the SEC is going to be in my face, or the FDA, or the FCC, or the FAA, or whoever.
Right.
All the Fs, right, and the S's. They were always they were starting to be in our face before we even got going.
Right.
And now I think they're letting it rip, and the creativity is coming back. And everything I see now as a venture capitalist, I feel like I'm funding.
Right.
Because it's so exciting. And I've been traveling around the world a lot. And it feels like that innovative streak is starting to happen in a lot of places like Latin America and India. Hopefully this domino will eventually hit Europe, but I think Europe is going to be slow to adapt. Japan, I'm looking forward to making a lot of trips to Japan because generally we've noticed Japan becoming more and more and more innovative as the years go by. So I hope we find some entrepreneurs there. I can't think of a better time to be me, to be a venture capitalist. We're seeing deals from all over the world. They're extraordinary, and it's fun.
So uncertainty in the transition, but at the same time, a great liberating element with the stranglehoods from literally one generation, at least maybe two generations of rules and regulations, bureaucracy seeking rent, seeking to increase its strangle on the various aspects of the economy, that being broken up. And that's liberating for entrepreneurs, hopefully liberating for the next generation. That's obviously the bull case. Very good. Now, Jane, you're always very sane and very wise, and you have had such great responsibilities and such incredible leaderships. Tell us a little bit, your perspective on what's going on in your home turf, which is Washington, D.C.
Well, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm sorry not to be in my home turf, which is California. My official residence, by the way, is on Venice Beach, on the beach. I mean, I have a house, but it is on the beach in LA. And I have 2 children and 5 grandchildren out there and love being out there. And I'll be out there next weekend, but I just couldn't manage the trip now. Before I answer your question, I have to say something very special about my friend Yoshi. I mean, my goodness, I'm not with Yoshi. And this conference is, talk about innovative, highly innovative, as he is. There he is. Hello, Yoshi. I mean, what does he not know how to do? He's a thought leader. He's a entrepreneur. He hosts rock concerts, or I think he does. So if Taylor Swift comes to outer space, Yoshi will be there. And he puts together interesting conferences. And what can he not do? I'm waiting for Yoshi to reappear in the 2028 Olympics in Los Angeles as some kind of star athlete, pole vaulter. I'm not sure what his specialty will be, but why not? So Yoshi, you have another chapter as far as I'm concerned. So what is going on? I'm in Washington, which I sometimes call the entertainment capital of the world, and it's a lot of entertainment at the moment. I would push back on what we just heard in this respect. I am a capitalist. I'm also a Reagan Democrat. I supported Ronald Reagan's foreign policy enthusiastically. And I am, I say often, a pro-defense, pro-trade, pro-business, progressive Democrat. There are only 5 of us left, and I should probably be embalmed in a museum. But my point about this is I see the need to balance 2 things. One is a free capitalist system that can innovate. I think that is the future. And I worry that things like tariff wars are not good for a free capitalist system. But I also see a reinvented government that can do a couple of things that really matter to me. One of which is keep us safe. Terrorism doesn't know national borders. And I don't think necessarily that an unfettered capitalist system is going to prevent terrorism. Climate is another piece that is something that the tech sector can innovate about and should be innovating about. I'm enthusiastically for that, but let's not forget climate. And the third thing is a safety net. And no, I'm not for a big welfare state, and no, I'm not for a deep state, but I am for a government that thinks about those who would be left behind if we didn't provide certain support for them. And so, I'm for reinventing government. I'm for, a way to make it less bureaucratic and more effective. And I am for taking the shackles off industry. And I do think they can coexist. Last comment. I think the way DOGE is going about things in Washington is, with a chainsaw, not a scalpel. And I think the collateral damage is serious. And, special pleading here. I headed something called the Wilson Center, the Living Memorial to Woodrow Wilson in Washington for 10 years after I left Congress. I went there enthusiastically because it was a bipartisan thought space, something like what Tino heads, and he can obviously talk about Carnegie. But to see it dismantled this way, and to see the human casualties and the intellectual casualties is, I think, very cruel and needless. And I don't support doing things like that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So move fast and break things, the opportunity, and here the high risk of collateral damage, of unintended consequences, of a transition period that may actually end up, causing more calamities than doing good. Now, Tino, the stage is yours on the whole big team. Where do you come in?
I come in, first of all, realizing there was a scary sign there that says time's up. I don't see it anymore, so that's good. So maybe I have a little more time than I thought.
That was fake news.
That's the one.
Oh, okay, all right. I'm gonna look the other way.
Don't ignore this guy.
So first, Yoshi, thank you for the invitation. It's a real honor to be here. Tim, really a pleasure to meet you. I've heard a lot about you, good chance to meet you. And of course, my friend Jane and I go way back. Probably it's every 2 weeks we end up on a panel together, Jane. So it's great to see you again. I think it's really interesting to hear both of you because I agree with pieces of what both of you have shared. And I'm going to make my case for intellectual candor and honesty. I think that's important. So let me start with California, what you said about it. I moved to California as a kid from northern Mexico, and I was amazed. There were a couple of things that growing up I loved about California. The first is that as a kid, I felt like the little desert town when I was growing up benefited from big public investments that had been made generations earlier, the California Water Project, the University of California Agricultural Extension. I also felt California benefited from this sort of counterculture, try anything, very bold, very dynamic vision. Intellectual honesty compels me to admit that these days we don't build that much in California. And one reason I like to be in contact and conversation with people from Japan, including Kenji Kushida, who works at Carnegie, is my colleague and is terrific, that Japan can get things built, trains, bridges, dams, infrastructure, power plants. And I think there's a lot to learn in terms of how can we get the benefit of this incredible environment, this amazing scenery, but actually be honest about the fact that we stop being able to build things. Second, I do think that there are times when things get a little too set in their ways in both government and the private sector. A little bit of shaking things up can be a useful thing. Growing up in northern Mexico, it did feel to me that a one-party system, which is what was playing out in Mexico back then, with everything pretty much tightly controlled by the same people, was not a good thing. However, I also believe that part of what has made this country great is a set of interrelationships around the world. In North America, across the Pacific Ocean, to Japan and South Korea, to Europe. I think that is reflected in the immigration we've had here to California. As Jane knows, I have a big interest in artificial intelligence. I spent most of my career as a professor at Stanford University. How many of you have heard of the HAI, the Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence Institute at Stanford? Some years ago, when we were trying to get that off the ground, there was a meeting of most of the faculty interested in AI at the time. This is maybe 6 years ago. Those of us who showed up to that meeting were going to listen to these short presentations of people talking about what they wanted to do, what kind of innovation they thought was exciting, might be spun off into different companies. Of the 6 people who presented, 5 of us were born outside the United States. So when I think about the current moment, I'm all for a little bit of shaking things up, but I do worry about disrupting too much our relationships with the rest of the world, particularly our longtime allies, including in Asia. So I'm hoping we can strike a reasonable balance. Last thing I'll say is, Japan is in a very complicated geopolitical neighborhood. This is part of what we work on at Carnegie. And Japan has managed over many decades to find a way to keep its own dynamic independence and voice, but at the same time to keep a strong connection to the United States. One of the important reasons why those partnerships loom large is that we can't always trust countries with big economies that may say they have good intentions, but may have a set of values and priorities that are not in sync with every other country. So I'm talking about China as one example. There's a lot of good business that can be done with China, and the world depends on some reasonable relationship with China. And yet, it is also important to understand where values diverge. And to my mind, when I think about the ability of the US and its allies to effectively respond to geopolitical threats, to my mind, it really depends on relatively integrated supply chains across North America, so Canada, Mexico, the US, as well as across Asia. And that's part of what I want to make sure we spend some time thinking about.
Great, fantastic. I want to pivot a little bit. And the issue is trust. And I would start with a quick anecdote. I was approached by the leading American cybersecurity company. And the idea was to broker a deal with one of the leading Japan conglomerates. And the idea was that there would be a partnership and it would be a complete win-win in the sense of that this, would create a marriage in heaven where, you would become potentially with the Japan trust and the American technology, the dominant cybersecurity company, not just in Japan, but in Asia Pacific. The deal was stopped by the CEO of the Japanese company with one sentence: we cannot trust the Americans. Be my guest, but the question is, Jane, and I'm going to start with you because you're the wise one in the room and you've got the prettiest pictures behind you. Clearly, in the last 30 days in particular, there's been, not 30, in the last 100 days, there's been a lot of damage done to trust in America. What are the 2 or 3 things America can do now to start rebuilding that trust or to prove that the trust is still there?
It has been 100 days. It feels like 100 years, gotta say. And it is a very different America than the one we had 100 plus days ago. Trust is hugely important. I would argue that for a long time, and this I would blame both political parties in America for, we have lost trust in our public institutions. The term "the deep state" is an ugly term. It's supposedly pejorative, and it is. But the deep state or the state has not really helped the people for a long time. The Democratic Party didn't figure this out and lost the election. I don't think the Trump Party, I'm not sure there is a Republican Party in America anymore. The Trump Party cares very much about this. But at any rate, I think we, America, losing trust in our own institutions over many years. I think your question is much broader. It's about, can the world trust us?
Yeah.
And I think that in this last 100 days, which feels like it's much longer, the answer to that at the moment is no. And why is the answer no? First of all, there's chaos in our government. I'm not saying every instinct is wrong. I don't believe that. I think some instincts are right. But the way they have executed their policies has been inconsistent, changes on the day, changes with the messenger, and huge mistakes. I mean, I would notice something like using Signal, a commercial media app, for having, classified discussions as one of those mistakes. And this whole noise about due process has really caused fissures in the United States and with the world. And I would say, I like Tino's comments about Japan. I mean, let's remember the long relationship that we have built, certainly since the World War II, with Japan, and how constructive it has been by and large, and how this Commission on National Defense Strategy that I just chaired called for an integrated defense strategy against China, but also for the security of both of our countries. And Japan is a great ally for that. But now that our government's talking about the fact that partners and allies are not valued more in Europe than in Asia, that's creating more distrust. So if your question is, Does trust matter? You bet it does. I think the future of the United States, both for our own citizens and with respect to the rest of the world, is based on trust and values. And we are sadly right now squandering both.
Right. Timothy.
So if you look at my tie, it says Bitcoin on one side, right? The other side says freedom and trust, Draper Associates.
Okay.
If you can't, you know,
So you're running for president. Is that
I brought this up with this wonderful man, the biggest guru in India, Gurudev Sri Sri Ravi Shankar. And I said, you know, it all comes down to freedom and trust, because the socialist countries don't trust their people and there's no freedom. And the capitalist countries trust their people and set them free, and they figure out how to make a living and good things happen. And he said, yes, freedom, trust. You can't have freedom without trust. You can't have trust without freedom. And of course, that's the way the guru talks. But it really has stuck with me. I've noticed that as I go around the world, I meet with all the leaders, all the presidents of all these countries, and they all want entrepreneurship there. I look at them and I say, are you trying to dictate to your people how their life should be? Or are you trusting them to go out there in a capitalist society and make a living and do great things? And if they want to dictate to their people and tell them all what to do, I know that economy will go flatline and it'll be a bad place for me to invest. But if they're saying, hey, I believe in you, my people, you're going to do the right thing, I'm going to set you free, you're going to do great things. And I want to talk to Jane about one thing, which is, here's something I noticed. Let's say Facebook, Meta, has a 40% layoff one day. It's a one-day story. People go away and they go try to find new jobs, and in a capitalist society, they get new jobs, and naturally it happens. We lay off 3 people in the Commerce Department, and they're screaming, and we hear it from the hills, and they're whining and screaming, and and you hear things like, I would have taken a job in the private sector, but I didn't want to work very hard, so I took a job in the public sector. That is not the attitude we want. It isn't the type of people we want running our country, and it was the bureaucrats that were running our country. I wish it were you, Jane, but it's not. It's the bureaucrats. We created that wonderful law that was the Jobs Act, and Congress passed it. The bureaucrats sat on that for 7 years, and then they killed it. That was what America has come back and realized that party did not do. They did not encourage them to go out and do great things. They did not trust people, and the bureaucrats were running the country. And I am so glad that there's a big light shone on that bureaucracy, and all of a sudden, all this corruption's coming to light. All these people are getting fired, and you say, chainsaw, my God, I'd rather they had a laser firing these people. It really is time, and it's time for us to take our country back from the bureaucrats. That's all there is to it. And no, I'm not running for anything.
Little fun fact, as you know, I'm a big proponent of Pax Nipponica, Japan as an example of capitalism that actually works. Japan is the only country where the number of national bureaucracies was shrunk after Gyosei Kaikaku, right? That happened in 1995. Bureaucracies went from 23 to 13. Japan is the only country where the number of government employees every year over the last 10 years has been falling. Japan is the only country in the OECD where, thank you, entitlements, which is the real elephant in the room, is the only country in the OECD where entitlements keep on being cut. So it's very interesting that you have that. And by the way, it's actually coming through Japan last quarter.
Actually, the word entitlement is a socialist word.
Of course.
It's like, oh, I'm entitled to a TV. I'm entitled to a Tesla.
I'm entitled
to a jet.
Right.
I want a jet. I should be in. Somebody else has a jet. I want a jet.
So it's
I mean,
in. So it's
That makes no sense.
no, but what is interesting, right? Again, just since I'm promoting Japan, right? Again, Japan does kaizen. Japan doesn't do chainsaw, right? Little by little, things get better. And after 20 years, things look pretty awesome. Now, Tino, on these big questions, right, that were just discussed, what's your take on how can America re-win the trust?
It comes down to 4 words: fewer tweets and more trade. I don't know what else to say. I mean, let me expand on that just a little bit. Every new administration has some room to set a new set of priorities. But I think what is really striking to me is that the entire world is de-Americanizing right now. Part of what has allowed this country to prosper and thrive is not only immigration, but also trade. And I think trade has had, for a lot of reasons, including bringing market economies to other countries, beneficial effects. We're not just sort of like not leaning into that, we're affirmatively pulling back from that in dramatic ways. By the way, I mean, the lawyer side of me would like to point out that when the International Emergency Economic Powers Act was passed, which is a law that is mostly being used right now to impose tariffs, it was meant for a fairly specific purpose, which is in the event of a dramatic economic emergency, the president ought to be able to act. This feels to me like a bit far afield from the original purpose of the law. But in any event, I do recognize that this administration has different views on trade. My only point is that if we expect robust international relationships to help us, not only to promote economic development here in this country, but also to bring billions of people out of poverty around the world with market mechanisms, as well as promote our security, at some point, my hope is that this administration will rethink its approach to trade.
You know, I'm a free trader, completely free trader. I want all the barriers gone. I actually think this is a plan to get to free trade.
I'd love to hear more about that.
Okay. The idea is they say, if we're negotiating, here's a shock to your system. We're going to hit you with 20% tariffs. Boom. Now you come to the table and I say 20% tariffs as long as your tariffs are high. Then I'm bringing them down as you bring yours down. And eventually we realize, hey, we're both better off with free trade. I think that's where we're going. And I'm an optimist, so that's where I think we're going.
Here's what we have in common. We're both optimists. The question is on what time frame. I think the word think is doing a lot of work there. I'll just note, I do think negotiation does sometimes take saying, look, if you don't come to the table and rethink this, I'm going to impose a cost on you. What makes me worry a bit as a fellow person who I think has benefited from trade and believes in it is a lack of a coherence here. I'm thinking partly about we impose, we take away, we impose back again. We gave a 90-day reprieve on the tax stuff, but we're going to have maybe now some tariffs on semiconductors. What about cars? They're in, they're out. It does worry me because I do feel part of what COVID has shown us, which is really striking, is partly because of technological change. Supply chains do begin to move a little bit more. Now they do get hardwired in after a while. So my hope would be this is where we can find some common ground. I would say to the extent anyone here is in a pipeline into the administration, I would say let's start with North America and stabilize this, get some deal, and show that we can still keep integrated supply chains here. Then let's continue with our allies, Japan, Europe, and then go from there. My hope is.
And if I could add
go ahead, Jane.
a few things here. Do we not understand cross-border manufacturing? I mean, it just seems to me these tariffs were not thoughtful. I am not against tariffs in certain circumstances, but I am for thoughtful tariffs and I am for certainty, which is the only way you're going to get manufacturing, whether it's US or Japan driven or anybody else, to build in the US. I mean, if you're for this today and you're exempting cell phones tomorrow, but it's only temporary, but it's here, but it's there, not only is that an amateur team, but it's not a good look for getting to a goal that I think we all agree with. Let me just say something to Tim, though. You know, in partial defense of government workers, a lot of people don't join government. Certainly I didn't, just to have a cushy job. Try Congress, by the way. It's not a cushy job, especially if you're representing LA in a lean Republican district as a Democrat. And your kids are there and you're flying across country every single weekend, and Congress is not a learning institution. So you're trying to learn some issues you don't know to try to do a good job. It's exhausting. And why did I do that? Because I thought I could add value, which is a motivation for a lot of people who work in a lot of government agencies. Are there deadbeats? There are. I'm going to let you talk. I just wanted to say this. There are deadbeats everywhere. There are deadbeats in industry too. But creative destruction as a strategy works much better in industry than it does under the Doge team in government. And what we're ending up doing is throwing out some of the best and brightest and cutting off some of our best government tools like soft power, when in fact we should be going the opposite direction and throwing out, the freeloaders and keeping the best and brightest.
Right. I totally agree. You got elected. You worked for your position. You earned your position. You have done great things for your citizens. The bureaucrats are there forever. You can't get rid of them. They're not able to be fired. They're unionized, for God's sake. It makes no sense. There is no cutting to the bureaucracy. Nobody's trying to cut the Congress people's jobs. They're our representatives. They're doing a good job. They're doing everything they can. They're creating good laws, whatever. But the bureaucrats are not letting those laws go through.
Oh, it's a mixed bag. And I just say this about Congress now, which is very unfortunate. When I was a congressional aide, which I was in another century, and when I was in my first terms in Congress, working with the other side, the other party, to solve problems for the country was the business model. And you got rewarded for being bipartisan. Now, the business model is blame the other side for not solving the problems, because if you are bipartisan, you get primaried, which is a new verb, and you get taken out. And so Congress is much more of a re-election machine than it is anything that's useful for the country. Witness the fact that it's doing almost nothing in light of some very serious issues.
Great. Nice American debate.
By the way, it wasn't happening during the Doge years, during the woke years.
Reality check. Last week, I had to give a presentation to the board of Japan's largest car company. What do I tell them? Because this is not the breakfast. This is a company that does 10 million units all over the world, that has a thought out capital allocation process. Where are my productive assets? This is not something you can change like you can change a hedge fund portfolio within 24 hours. This is something that needs 5-10 years planning, 5-10 years of trust in the whole system. You know what their reaction is right now? Total seizure. Everything is on hold. Everything is being stopped. And the risk, if Toyota isn't, sorry, now I said the name. I could have said Volkswagen. No, but it's very interesting, right? I think that, we have this wonderful debate. I think we are potentially underestimating the risk of a seizure of the global system that will make the COVID seizure look like child's game.
Okay, so for one thing, Toyota is making a huge mistake. This is a time to innovate. It's not a time to seize up. It seems like that's like panic mode sitting there instead of thinking, hey, there's some interesting things we can do. I mean, they lost about a bunch of their market because there were innovators that came in there with Tesla. So, hey, innovate. If you're Toyota, this is your time. This is a cool time to innovate.
I can tell you the one thing that
robotics, AI.
Just one second. It's hard to accuse Toyota of not being innovative, but that's a different story. I can tell you in the real world, what Toyota is doing is they're doubling down on their China strategy. Because China is predictable. Whether you like the regime or not is irrelevant, right? So, you know, in this real world, right, for leaders, for people who are trying to build a business, whether it's at the startup level, whether it's at the non-government level, whether it's at the policy level, whether it's at the, you know, Fortune 500 level, right? What's your advice? What should I do? These times are extraordinarily uncertain. What exactly, you know, would be your top advice to, you know, the head of companies? Start with you.
Autonomous driving is just the beginning. There will be a great many innovations that really lean into artificial intelligence, what it can do. All car companies should effectively become partly AI companies. And don't stop betting on the American market. Now, this is where I'm an optimist, because I think right now it is a little unpredictable. You got to admit it's a little unpredictable, right? But let us hope that one way or the other, you know, in 2 or 3 years, things will settle into a predictable pattern and the American consumer will be a good bet. Now, one thing that Kenji at Carnegie has been working on, and we were just talking about the other day, is that part of what has been helpful here in California, despite our problems, is a recognition that you cannot wait until the technology is 1,000% safe to start testing it and deploying it. So when I see those Waymo taxis in San Francisco, I'm recognizing that it is an imperfect but important step in a direction that's promising. So I would also say work with the government back in Japan to get a degree of experimental room to start deploying when you have less than 1,000% safety. Human drivers are imperfect. Human drivers are not the standard to shoot for. We can do better than that. But if the goal is complete 1,000% safety, it will slow down innovation a little bit. Now, I want to say just one thing. In that whole dance of like innovation and safety, I think only somebody who's insane would say that every government agency is pretty smart and efficient. They're not. But not all bureaucrats are totally bad from my perspective. In particular, one place where California and Japan have something in common that runs a little bit through civil service and not just technology innovation is improving air quality. Where if I think about the amount of lead in Los Angeles or Tokyo, when I moved to California in the mid-1980s, it was much worse than now. And I do think it's been a mix of the right government civil servants working with the private sector. I wish I could tell that story about everything, but I just want to make it clear, I think it's not a total failure.
Right, fantastic.
Yep.
Jane.
Yeah, so if I remember correctly, Toyota's U.S. headquarters were in my district in Torrance. I think they've moved since. And Toyota was a very good citizen of Torrance and invested in, you know, local charities and schools and the rest of it, and had a gorgeous Japanese garden in its headquarters, by the way. So good, you know, promotion for Japanese culture. And I think Toyota is a great company, and I hope they don't freeze in the sense you're talking about it, Tim. But if I were advising Toyota now, which I'm not, I would say maybe wait before you decide to dedicate more resources to building a plant, another plant in the US, until you make sure that the economy has stabilized and that that kind of investment will be welcome. But don't stop innovating. I think we're all agreeing on that. And Toyota's corporate culture has been very pro-innovative. And the only way to get to better cars, better transportation, et cetera, is through innovation. And one of the sad things is this move, it seems to me now, to push foreign students away from U.S. universities and also to try to, and I assume Tim would agree with me on this, micromanage universities. Tino, I think you're an overseer at Harvard, and bravo to Harvard for pushing back. I'm not defending everything Harvard does or has done, but I think universities should be a safe space from government to try to imagine the best learning environment for their students, including foreign students.
You know, let me go back. I started Draper University. I started a school. Turns out the university system is a little bit rigged toward the existing schools. Anybody wants a student loan, you go through all that accreditation, you go through all those systems. I had to make sure first of all, I had to try to get people to pay double tuition to come or whatever. And then eventually I realized that our school was so effective that I could back a few of them and make so much money that it could pay for itself. So I've found a new way to do it. And I think it's okay to shine another light on the nonprofits. I don't think Harvard's all wonderful. I went to Harvard. I went to Harvard Business School, went to Stanford undergrad. I actually think both of them are, in effect, bloated universities, but they are great attractions for immigrants. And I love that. But it may be that there are new universities that come up that are more innovative, trying new things, not telling everybody what they're supposed to do and say, that end up being better universities for those immigrants. So what we really don't want to lose is the immigrants coming to America and getting educated here.
That's a
And-
position on which we can all
you
agree.
don't want to lose.
That is,
But
I
you
was thinking.
might lose it. You might lose it in one of two ways. One is Harvard and Stanford, the bloom's off the rose, and so nobody wants to come here. Or you might lose it because Harvard and Stanford are providing bad education and people look to other places. But you might get better things by having new universities come up and innovate and compete with Harvard and Stanford.
Yeah, well, that's a good thing. Well, I mean, what's wrong with that? I'm a Harvard product too. I went to the law school. But Yoshi, you can run, but you can't hide. You have this chain of business schools in Japan. How's that going? Is this, maybe you don't want to talk right now, but I'd be very interested in what the culture is like in Japan.
It's going.
Innovation.
He said it's going great.
He's very shy. He's Japanese,
Oh,
as you
I
know.
see. He's very shy.
And so, he's doing, it's going so great that he can afford to sponsor the 4th largest rock concert in Japan.
Yeah, that's what, right. Exactly.
Tino, a little response since you're on the spot.
No, just simply,
How were your last 4 days?
Interesting, let's just say, but I'm very pleased to be here and I look forward to cocktails. So
Tino is on the board of Harvard.
I would just say, I think the higher ed sector is definitely a sector that could use some innovation. I do think some of these universities that have stayed around as long as they have, Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, someday Stanford, are able to persist because they adapt. And some of that is because of competitions. Sometimes interesting programs bubble up elsewhere and then they merge or they kind of reconstitute. But I think anybody who says, for example, I love Stanford and therefore I want to protect it, make sure it never changes, doesn't truly love the university. I think it requires a constant reassessment and reevaluation. Why are the scientists doing their work this way? Why can't they do it this way? What's the right relationship with the private sector? Where are these students going? Is this the right place for them? And I would welcome that. And I think all these places would be better off if they had a little more of an entrepreneurial mindset.
30 seconds, advertisement for Japan. In Japan now at Tokyo University, 1/3 of the graduate students, right, are non-Japanese, most of them actually Chinese. Tokyo University provides an excellent education. They've got a new president and they're actually, changing the way, the assessment works and making it more competitive within different departments to actually pull that proud, Japanese education system a little bit closer towards competition. And Yoshi, just to make an advertisement for you, in bringing the MBA school to Japan, which initially people went, we're Japanese, we don't need this. We have best in class on-the-job training. Actually instilling some outside blood and some outside knowledge, was actually a huge catalyst for overall change. Now, you guys are on the spot. Question and answers. We're going to take 3 questions. Please ask a question. We can do the commentaries over cocktails. Please ask a question. We're going to have to cut it tighter. 20 seconds is your time. If you go over, a bottle of champagne for each of the panelists here, and Jane gets the Magnum here. Okay. 3 questions, and please direct it to whom? Right, come on.
I have a question to Jane. Japan is ahead of table in terms of negotiation on tariff, and we have only 90 days. And Minister Akazawa was in Washington, D.C. What would you advise Prime Minister Ishiba to do? I know you have some kind of insights as to what kind of discussion went on yesterday.
Wait, Jane, wait.
This is a question for Tim. So if you had to invest all of your money into the venture capital asset class in a country outside of the United States, where would you pick?
Hi.
Founder and CEO of an AI company. We're Series B. I'm also a former bureaucrat, though, which is where I learned my work ethic. And I'm curious if you can also speak to any concerns you may have around rule of law and due process, particularly as it relates to some of the ever-changing policies.
Right, excellent. Jane, go ahead. Advice to the Prime
So
Minister.
Yoshi, you know, I don't know the details of the negotiation, but I would have this advice. First of all, say thank you multiple times before, during, and after every single meeting to President Trump, seriously. Second of all, I think this could be a win-win. I can't imagine why not. The history between Japan and the US recently is positive, not just in the Trump administration, also in the Biden administration. And Japan has been a very good citizen in terms of both economic and defense issues in the Indo-Pacific. So I would come into it optimistic and ready to use Japanese brilliance and hopefully have a negotiation from the American side that is a serious negotiation. And I think the result's going to be great.
Fantastic. Thank you. Timothy, where do you put your money?
So this is going to be an answer here. Well, I'd love to say Japan, but the innovation is the strongest in the places that are the freest. And there's a place, well, so you would argue that Dubai would be a good place. You'd say Miami would be a good place, the country of Miami. You would say Austin, Texas would be a good place. I would also say Prospera is a good place. They're creating a country within Honduras that's a complete free trade zone, and they're allowing all sorts of innovations happening there. And it's really extraordinary how that's happening. In general, I'm going to be looking to, you know, Argentina with Malay, or Bukele with El Salvador, or, I mean, India is so big. It's a great opportunity. Modi's keeping a good, steady hand. I think he believes in capitalism. I think he's okay. I wouldn't put a dime into China. I think President Xi is a dictator, a socialist. He doesn't understand. He's very good politically, clearly, but he is not good economically. And you can see, I mean, freedom allowed that country to grow at 8% a year, and today it's flatlining. Now, why? He went from capitalism to socialism. And boy, it didn't take long for it to go flatline. So for Toyota, looking at China, working with China, boy, I would avoid China like the plague.
Excellent. Due process.
So thank you. I have what maybe will be good news and bad news. I think the challenging news is maybe not surprisingly, I'm a bit concerned. I think the administration has sometimes made arguments that seem a little bit strained in its positions in court, or tried to get around what some of these judgments require. And, you know, the American tradition is one where we don't expect judges to have unlimited power, but we do expect them to be backstuck to protect private property, due process, freedom of speech and expression, and so on. And I think, you know, if the administration had a little bit the courage of its convictions, it would argue a little more slowly, not always rush to the Supreme Court, and not always refuse to provide information that judges are asking for. That said, I think it is important to take a step back and get a historical perspective. A lot of things that seem very dramatic and risky at one point, if you zoom out, you can see that there is time for people to find a good balance between pushing back, letting things pass a little bit. And I would note in particular that three critical elements of what supports American democracy feel like they're going to be pretty important to me in the years to come. And they provide at this very moment plenty of room for people who disagree with the administration to litigate, to speak out, to engage in whatever action they think is appropriate under the law, or people who agree with the administration to do so under the law. The first is that we have powerful courts in this country. We're not the only country in the world that does, but we do. And one reason that's the case is we don't have a career track for judges the way you do in a lot of countries where you get right out of law school and you start as an assistant judge, an associate judge, and then a judge. Instead, people go and prove their worth in the private sector or working in the government, and then they get considered for judicial appointments. So they come with a savvy and experience to institutions that have a tradition of independence. Second, federalism. The vast majority of public employees, say what you will, whether you like them or don't, are at the state and local level in this country. Only a small fraction of employees are actually federal. So anybody who tries from Washington to control everything that happens in the country is likely to fail. Third, we have an independent media and ideas sector, and there's a lot of noise out there, and I think free speech is super important. Not everybody has to tune into the same source. You know, Elon Musk has 210 million Twitter followers. I guess we call it X now. CNN has 700,000 viewers on prime time. So there's a range of different sources and viewers, but that allows for people to know what is going on and make their judgments about how they want to vote in the next election. And that gives me a sense that right now we're in a place where American pluralism is just working itself out. People just need to figure out where they stand and what they want to do about it.
Excellent. Next set of questions. Anybody, please.
This question to Tim. What do you think the long-term perspective of the cryptocurrency, given what happened in the last month or so and the war to go to the chaotic de-globalization?
Great. Crypto. Anybody else? No other question? The floor is yours.
Good. Easy. By the way, I'd vote for you, Jane. Cryptocurrency has had a dark cloud over it for the last 10 years, but specifically SEC under Gensler was a particularly dark cloud. He was regulating by enforcement. He was going around saying, you know, I don't like your face, so there's a, you know, $100 million fine going to you, or, you know, oh, I'm going to let you go through even though, you know, you're SPF, you know. Now, I think they're going to actually make it a decent regulatory environment. So I'm actually very happy about that. And I think we have Bitcoin. Eventually, we're going to have a global currency. If you're a free trader, you got to love Bitcoin because it's accepted everywhere. In fact, first in Japan, you guys were first to accept Bitcoin retail. I remember going in and buying jewelry for my wife, and it was in yen and in Bitcoin. I'm glad I didn't pay Bitcoin for it at the time. So I think there's going to be, I think these stable coins are a bridge to Bitcoin, and they're a bridge to that free trade world that we eventually want to get to. And I think that that's good. I mean, hey, it's just better to move money digitally, and it's better to have, and that's the stable coin, and it's better to have currency that is global, open, transparent, keeps perfect records, and that's Bitcoin. So look, if you're I mean, we saw Silicon Valley Bank die here, and I got 15 calls from entrepreneurs saying, hey, can you bail me out? We've got to make payroll on Monday and it's Thursday. And, you know, I kind of worked deals with each of them. And at that moment, I realized, well, wait, it's not always secure. So now everybody has to have a treasury department in my startup world. They've got to have some money in big banks. They say yes. Some money in small banks, and they say, why? And I say, because the US government can bail out a small bank, maybe not a big bank, and then some in Bitcoin. And they say, why Bitcoin? Because if there is this domino effect that people were talking about in the banking system, you are going to need to still pay your employees and your suppliers and keep your business open. So you should have some in Bitcoin. And I think that goes for not just corporates, but also individuals. If you're responsible for a family, you should not have all your money in fiat currency. You should have some in Bitcoin. If you're like 6 months worth, keep them alive for 6 months so you can kind of stabilize. And now governments are recognizing that a part of their treasury should also be in Bitcoin. So I think it is a responsible thing to do. And I think we now have a better currency than we did before. And eventually we're going to get there. It's like any new innovation. We're all riding on horses and somebody comes up with a horseless carriage. Eventually we're all going to go there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I wouldn't say undermine the dollar dominance. I think there will be, social media is so fast that things happen immediately. I had my dad gave me this $1 million bill when I was 10 years old. And I go, what? $1 million is so great. What can I do with it? And he said, nothing. And I said, what do you mean nothing? He said, that's $1 million Confederate dollars. The Confederates lost the war to the Unions. The Union dollars had better technology and everybody moved to the Union dollar. And the Confederate dollar became worthless. I actually believe that that will eventually happen with fiat currencies that are tied to banks, governments, through this system of people, because you can now do it all through software. Just the way eventually we're all going to be in self-driving cars and we aren't going to have to drive ourselves. It's going in those directions. It's just a matter of time. And I think it's going to happen super fast. So make sure you have some Bitcoin when it does.
This is not financial advice. Under Gensler SEC, you and I would be handcuffed out of here now. So we're glad that we can speak up. I have a very different opinion on this, but that's a different story. I want to
know. Is that why you keep cutting in front of me here?
So, I'm just making sure that, one last question, and you've been fantastic, and I, very engaging here. Jane, I'm going to start with you. You've got 30 seconds of advice to President Donald Trump. What is the number one thing what is the number one thing that you would ask of him?
Wow.
I have never seen you speechless.
Well, I
This
think
is spectacular.
First of all, he would never take my advice. But I think it would have two parts, but it's one thing. It would be create certainty, not chaos, and show compassion for human beings.
Thank you.
Fewer tweets, more trade. And there's really no point in having executive orders against people you perceive as your enemies. That's kind of a waste of time. Makes you look weak.
Great.
So I've given him this advice, which is 10, 20, 30. Blow up the existing tax code, which is awful, and just charge people and corporates 10% of the first $1 million they earn, 20% of the next 10 million, and 30% after that. You would actually generate more revenue. You might pay more taxes, but I would be very happy to do it. I would pay a lot less in accounting, lawyer, auditing, whatever, bookkeeping fees. And I mean, ultimately, it would be a nice bridge to when we do have a Bitcoin economy where it keeps perfect records. So I think 10, 20, 30, that's what I would tell. And I did.
Could I say something to Tim, just if I could?
Go ahead.
First of all, I like your tax idea. I really do like your tax idea. And second of all, I agree with you that we should reform entitlements. But third of all, I think we have to have a rules-based international order, which is much more efficient and much less bureaucratic. We can't just leave it with no rules.
So for 30 seconds, my advice is very simple. You've got a unique opportunity with Japan, because Japan is big enough, it's the world's largest creditor country, has enough density of interactions with the United States in all dimensions of international transactions. make that deal with Japan work and make it work so that it actually becomes a role model, a blueprint for how these trade frictions with the other nations are possible to be resolved as well. It's got a unique window. I think if in 3 weeks' time we stand here and Nippon Steel is allowed to buy US steel, and there'll be a whole bunch of other transactions coming through, this becomes a potential role model, and that's an opportunity President Trump, I hope, will not squander. I want to thank you very much. Pax Nipponica is coming one way or the other, right? You will be coming to Japan.
I like that idea.
Of course.
That's
Yeah.
a good idea.
Yes.
Yeah, become the model citizen for the rest of the world to follow. It's a great
That's
idea.
good.
No, it's more about making America a model citizen again that the world can trust. Thank you very much. Jane, fantastic.
Bye,
Tino,
everybody.
you've been awesome. Professor. Very good.
I can see why.
Horizon.
much.
Okay.
You're awesome. I don't know.
Jane, thank you.
Bye, Yoshi.
Thank you.